Let's welcome Michele Verroken, a sports ethics and anti-doping advisor. Michele Verroken, thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Just before we get your insights on this, let's just take a quick listen to what the head of the Court of Arbitration for Sports had to say about this ruling just earlier today.
The athlete is under 16 and is a protected person under the World Anti-Doping Code. The panel considered that preventing the athlete to compete at the Olympic Games would cause her irreparable harm.
Michele Verroken, now the first question I can only ask you after hearing this, and I know this is the early stages, but how does a 15-year-old become embroiled in such a doping case?
Well, that will be part of the investigation that certainly needs to go on. And perhaps some of that information has already been provided to the Russian disciplinary committee that lifted the provisional suspension only days ago. Now to find, of course, that that decision was appealed by the International Olympic Committee, by the World Anti-Doping Agency, and by the International Federation for Skating. And of course, that was what the Court of Arbitration for Sport then themselves decided, well, hang on a moment. We haven't given this athlete a fair chance to bring forward whatever the defence is. So how she got caught up in this, we really don't know. And that will not come out until there is the formal hearing on the actual adverse finding and the violation itself.
So certainly we can see that uncertainty looms there. Now, we've seen that they're going to be allowing an extra ice skater to take part in that competition, which will be on the 17th. They're cancelling a medal ceremony. Surely this isn't the image that the Olympic Committee wants to give to the rest of the world.
Well, unfortunately, I feel that we've failed really to safeguard a young athlete, and now we're compounding a problem because not only has this athlete, but other athletes been denied their medal ceremony for the team event, but now we're also signalling that there'll be no medal ceremony for the singles event, and also in the likely or unlikely event that somebody's going to be disqualified in any case, we're bringing in another athlete. And certainly I don't feel this is a good place for athletes to feel that the anti-doping rules are truly protecting them. And we do need to take a long, hard look at how we are actually taking athletes through a due process. Anyone who's cheated should be facing the full sanctioning system that is available under the code. But at the present moment, there are so many flaws that have happened in the anti-doping system. It must be difficult for athletes to be trusting that system to protect them.
Indeed, Michele, it's Mark Owen alongside James here in the studio. Just perhaps the viewers aren't aware, but many of us journalists are, that you've actually set sort of the global standards in anti-doping ethics and in how athletes are controlled and how these matters are actually these guidelines are set out. So clearly you know exactly what you're talking about, and we really appreciate your insight. In terms of what's been happening then in Beijing, do you think there's a finger to be pointed at how the whole system has been working there, do you think? Has there been sort of a series of loopholes that people have fallen through?
Well, I don't know so much about what's actually happening in Beijing itself, but certainly any athlete going into an Olympic Games will be tested and retested. And so how do we really get to a situation where athletes are feeling confident that they are getting the results of those testing? Because most of the time I talk to athletes, they say, oh, I never got the results. So why not? Why are we not communicating to athletes? We are asking a young person to go into a toilet cubicle with a stranger and provide a urine sample in front of the doping control officer. And we've not moved forward from that system for many, many years. I'm now experimenting with other ways to really help get better testing programs out there. And then we fail to notice that that sample has not been reported. I mean, these are things that really have to be corrected if we get to get the trust of athletes into a system that's protecting them.
Indeed. As we've already discussed, we're talking about a 15-year-old child here, someone who really, there must be a duty of care on behalf of everybody who's dealing with this young person to make sure that they can cope with what's happening around them. So one can only imagine what her mental state is right now. Do you think there are questions to be asked about how the Russians are handling this?
Well, again, it's just whether it's unfortunate coincidences, but here again we have a Winter Olympics involving, a scandal around the Russians, and the very decision that was appealed by the Russians to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, that was to ban them for 4 years on the basis of everything that happened at the Sochi Winter Olympics, was, they decided to reduce that ban from 4 years to 2 because they were looking at the youngsters coming through and didn't think they should be tarred with that stigma of doping. And yet, is this just an unfortunate coincidence, or are we seeing the continuation of, an institutionalized doping that has been going on? And Russia may not be the only country, but at the moment they are being called out again, and we are in a situation that it's shaking the foundation of whether we trust sport anymore.
I mean, you talked there about protecting young athletes, but for the IOC, what can they do to protect them? Because she's going to be going out there competing against fellow skaters who, well, they'll have their own views on this regardless of the ruling. This is still an enormous amount of pressure for a 15-year-old.
Oh, certainly. And I'm just hoping that nothing happens. I mean, worst case scenario is always the sort of thing that I try and talk to my colleagues and my clients about is, what happens should she have an accident on the ice? What about the liability there? Who is going to take responsibility? Let's hope that nothing of that nature happens. But we really do need to make sure that there are such stringent penalties available if anyone has actually provided a doping substance to this young athlete without, sort of thought for what the longer term consequences would be. Her reputation will always be damaged by this incident, and that's really unfair when someone may not have actually deliberately engaged with doping. So we've got to improve the system. We really do have to make sure we exercise all the safeguards possible and focus in and keep the cheats out, but make sure there's a fair system.
All right. Well, thank you very much anyway for coming on and sharing your insight with us there. Mark will, of course, be following all of this over the coming weeks.